The following audio is from the Village Church. More information about the Village Church is available at www.thevillagechurch.net.
Well, if you have your Bibles, grab them. Psalm chapter 27. If you just started coming to the Village Church in the last couple of weeks, my name is Matt Chandler. I'm the pastor here. So it's good to be back. Been gone for a while. We've got a ton to do, so I'm just going to get going. Late in high school, I had a teacher that turned me on to the civil rights movement, and so always was a kind of fan of history, and he kind of turned me on to the civil rights movement, and that got that really grew in college. I was a leadership minor, and really the things that got accomplished in that 15-year window and continues to accomplish because of that 20-year window is remarkable. And as I began to study the civil rights movement, there was a singular letter that Martin Luther King Jr. wrote in April of 1963. It's a very well-known letter if you follow history and if you're familiar with this movement, called a letter from jail in Birmingham, or a letter from prison in Birmingham. And so that letter haunted me, and I'll explain why it haunted me after I read you a portion of the letter. Just to set the framework for where this letter was written, Martin Luther King Jr. had come into Birmingham, and they had staged a series of sit-ins, marches, and sanctions against the economy of Birmingham for the oppression of African Americans in Birmingham. And was imprisoned in that process, and the local clergyman, the white clergyman, had accused King of lacking patience and that he should trust them, all right, to push this ball of civil rights forward. And so in the beginning of the letter, if you haven't read this, you need to Google it. You'll find it easily. At the beginning of the letter, he said he usually does not respond to critics, because if he responded to all his critics, he would do nothing other than respond to his critics. And he said, but in this case, since they were brothers, he was going to respond to them. And so this is a part of that letter. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at a whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes as you explain to her that Funtown is closed to colored girls, and see an ominous cloud of inferiority begin forming in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness towards white people. When you have to concoct an answer for your 5-year-old son who is asking, Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean? When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable confines of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs that read white or colored. When your first name becomes nigger, your middle name becomes boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John. When your wife and your mother are never given the respected title Mrs. When you are harried by the day and haunted by the night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at a tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments. When you are forever fighting the degenerate sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it so difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break certain laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern, since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 that outlaws the segregation of schools. So this letter's written in 1963. Schools are still segregated. In 1954, the Supreme Court deemed that it was illegal to segregate schools. So Luther's point, or King's point, is that, we're breaking some laws while we press that certain laws take place. And so he sees that that's paradoxical, so he's trying to explain it here. So at first glance, it may seem rather paradoxical for us to consciously break some laws. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Now, let me tell you why this haunted me. First of all, this is not the distant past. You tracking with that? This is not 200 years ago. This is 63. Right? That a lot of people in these services are alive in 63 and not alive like a baby in mama's arms alive. Right? Here's what haunts me about the reality of the African American in 1963. And I thought this, I knew I was coming out of this, was ready to preach this message. And earlier this week, my 3-year-old daughter, Nora, she pulled out this bench that sits at the end of our bed. And she set it in the middle of our bedroom. And she climbed up on it. And now there was some music going in the background while Lauren and I were getting dressed. She was still in her PJs. And she pretended that she was on the balance beam from the Olympics. And so she twisted around and twirled, and I was giving her commentary. Nora Chandler from the United States of America. Oh, look at this, ladies and gentlemen. Here comes the twist. And the dismount, she stuck it. And Lauren and I applauded, and we scored her right. She got about a 6.2 or something like that, all right? But we scored it, and we all celebrated. And all 3 of my children are a delight to me. And so I just want to speak very frankly and honest. You turn a dog loose on any of my children, I would physically murder you. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, you can laugh all you want, but I would punch you and choke you and try to rip out I would physically try to destroy you. And you might be a big old boy. I'll take my chances. Right? I'm wiry, but I know the soft spots. All right? So you might be all yoked up MMA fighter. I'll punch you in your throat. I don't care how bad you are. You're going to go to the ground and I'm going to take the boots to you. All right? And so here's my thought. Here's what was haunting to me. How did they do this? Week in, week out, month in, month out, century in, century out, with nothing on the horizon. 1954, the Supreme Court of the United States of America says this stops. Nearly a decade later, nothing had changed. Right? How did they do it? How did week in and week out they walk under this oppression without going violent? So the thing to keep in mind is if you watch the civil rights movement under King, it doesn't go violent. Now, things get goofy after King, all right? But if you watch King and you watch King as he leads, it never goes violent. And so I've always wondered, how do they do it? Now, I know the big answer, right? God, all right? I know the big answer, but I want to know how they did it. Because there has to be some special dispensation of grace. Because what I said earlier is the honest truth. I know I'd go to jail. I know I'd make the news. I know I'm going to lose my job. All right. There's not going to be like, well, he was just in murdering the guy. Let's let him preach. All right. That's not going to happen. I know all that it would cost me. I know my other children would not get to visit daddy except through glass, and I would still murder you. How did they do it? And so, about 4 or 5 months ago, we had Dr. Rick Rigsby come speak to our staff. Dr. Rick Rigsby was a longtime professor at Texas A&M University. And thank you. I was just about to congratulate you for not whooping, and somebody blew it. So in the end, I cornered Dr. Rigsby because I needed to know the answer to this question, because it really has haunted me all these years. I've never been able to figure out how they endured. And he said, well, there were multiple pieces, but let me give you the main one. And what he pointed to as the main refuge, that thing that sustained the obedience of African Americans in the 60s during the civil rights movement, was how they approached God and how they worshiped with one another. So I don't know if you've been a part of an African American church service. It's called, the way they do it is call and response. Do you understand what that means? That means in that service, there are no spectators but God, and everybody's come to play. All right, there is interaction at every level of worship. It's not guys on stage and people in the crowd. It's we're all here to get after the Lord. All right, and it's going to go long, and it's going to go good. And man, I don't know if you've been there, but just in June, I was invited to speak at the E.K. Bailey Expositors Preaching Conference. It was me and 1,000 African-American pastors, only white dude in the room. All right, now, I start preaching, and they start, it threw me off. I mean, everybody's shouting at me, yelling. It threw, because I'm used to you. All right, and here's what you do. I'm like, what's that word? What does that say? Right? And so, man, I got a guy pacing in the back going, that's right, come on, all right? Right? So, Anglos don't do that. All right? Anglos have had bred into them, have been trained. You are here to perform for me. I am not a participant in this. I am a spectator. Because we have not bore the crushing weight of desperate need. So tell me about that, Pastor. Not a joining in with, but rather you. And so Rigsby said they would come in. That's what the 4-hour service. So if you get white people talking about black church and you're like, I'm going to go check out this church, they're like, pack a lunch, bro. Pack your lunch. I'm just saying. They're going to sing for like 2 hours. They're going to preach for an hour and 45 minutes. They're going to sing for 2 hours. They'll bring a sandwich or a cracker or something, man. You're going to die. But that's not how Anglos do it, is it? Most Anglos don't do it. Like most Anglos are like, hey, listen, you better be starting to wrap it up now, Pastor Chandler. Right? And so this call and response culture was, man, they pressed hard into the presence of God. And here's what's spectacular if you think about it. Like in that 4-hour gathering, nothing got solved. So they're walking into that service, past signs that read colored, whites only, past restaurants that they are not allowed to go into, all right, out of impoverished neighborhoods with impoverished schools into a worship center. And in that 4 hours, listen to me, nothing changed. They walked right out, and those signs were still there, right back to their impoverished housing, right back to the broken system. Nothing changed, but in those 4 hours, they met with the living God, and upon meeting with the living God, He was enough to sustain them and to make all of that go away for just a bit. And so what happened as Rigsby began to unpack that this is the fuel for their obedience. Right? That this was the fuel for their obedience. Some other scriptures started to jump out to me. So let's go to Psalm 27. We're going to pick it up in verse 4. King David has nothing in common with an African American in the 60s. Nothing. Hence the title King David. All right? But I want you to watch what King David prays to God. Psalm 27, we're going to pick it up in verse 4. One thing I ask of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in His temple. Now, let's stop. We're going to read more of this, but I want to stop, all right? I at times can feel stressed. I feel as though I have a very busy, albeit good life. So I pastor this church. I'm president of the Acts 29 Church Planting Network, 450 churches on 6 continents, all right, and growing, writing books, teaching outside of here. Very busy. I can get stressed out. Anybody else can feel a bit overwhelmed and stressed out? Yeah, okay. But you and me aren't king. All right, you and me might be businessmen and salesmen, and we might have busy lives, but no one's managing a kingdom. All right, and if it is, it's your tiny little sad kingdom. All right, you feel like you've got a kingdom. You got a little ghetto kingdom, all right? You're not sovereign of your own state, okay? You can't declare that people get murdered. You can't declare that people can be executed. You can't declare that this is the tax rate. Can you? If you can, please call me. Right? You can't do those things. King David can. And he's got the Philistines that are a nation on the border of Israel that can't seem to learn to quit invading. And say, how many times has he got to conquer the Philistines in one reign? He's like beats them, they run off, then come back, beats them, they run off, come back, beats them, run off, come back. I mean, just destroying the Philistines over and over and over again. They just regroup and come back for more. Right? So he's got the Philistines, he's got massive family issues. All right, like King David's family